Some people wake up late, others wake up alone. At first, this sounds like a joke, something light, even humorous. But beneath it lies a truth so uncomfortable that most people avoid looking at it directly. Waking up late is a habit. Waking up alone is a consequence. One can be corrected with an alarm clock. The other emerges slowly, silently, as the result of years of inner avoidance. Many people move through life surrounded by others, yet deeply alone. Not because they are unloved, but because they never learned how to be fully present, fully honest, fully awake to themselves. This is not a talk about sleep schedules. It is a reflection on awareness, responsibility, and the quiet psychological choices that determine whether a person grows or drifts. Let us explore why some people merely wake up late, while others wake up one day to find no one beside them. Waking up late is a simple delay. It means the alarm rang, consciousness stirred, and the body resisted for a few more minutes. It is an error that belongs to the surface of life. But waking up alone belongs to something much deeper. It is not caused by a single moment of negligence. It is shaped by repetition, by choices made quietly, often unconsciously, over long periods of time. One can miss an alarm once and laugh about it. But no one wakes up alone by accident. Human life is governed less by dramatic decisions and more by patterns. What we repeat, we become. What we avoid, we strengthen. When a person consistently evades difficult conversations, suppresses uncomfortable emotions, or delays inner growth, they are not choosing peace. They are choosing postponement. And postponement, when practiced long enough, becomes destiny. The psyche keeps careful records. Every time truth is swallowed to preserve comfort, something inside withdraws. Every time a feeling is dismissed instead of understood, a small distance is created. These distances are subtle at first, barely noticeable, but they accumulate like dust in a neglected room. One day, the space feels cold, unfamiliar, and empty, and the person wonders how it happened so quietly. Consider the familiar phrase, spoken with sincerity and self-deception at the same time. "I'll change later." It is rarely said with ill intent. Often it is spoken by people who genuinely believe time will be generous, that relationships are elastic, that patience is infinite. But later is a psychological illusion. Later becomes next year. Next year becomes a habit, and habit hardens into character. The tragedy is not that change fails to arrive. The tragedy is that the other person changes instead. They stop asking, they stop explaining, they stop hoping. Not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. Love does not usually end with shouting. It ends with silence. Modern psychology confirms what quiet observation has always shown: relationships rarely collapse because of constant conflict. They collapse because of emotional absence. The feeling of being unheard, unseen, and psychologically alone erodes connection more effectively than any argument. A fight still contains engagement. Silence contains resignation. When emotional neglect becomes the norm, the bond does not break, it thins. Communication becomes transactional. Presence becomes physical rather than psychological. Two people may still share a bed, a house, even a history, while living in separate inner worlds. This is often when waking up alone truly begins, long before anyone leaves. From a deeper psychological perspective, this pattern reflects unconscious living. When individuals fail to examine their inner life, they begin acting from habit rather than awareness. They repeat inherited behaviors, learned defenses, and unresolved wounds without realizing it. The unconscious does not announce itself. It expresses itself through repetition. A person who avoids emotional responsibility may believe they are preserving harmony, but internally they are avoiding growth. Growth demands confrontation with one's own limitations, fears, and contradictions. Avoidance feels safer in the moment, but safety purchased through unconsciousness carries a hidden cost. That cost is intimacy. Intimacy requires presence. Presence requires awareness, and awareness requires courage, the courage to face oneself honestly. Without this, relationships cannot deepen. They can only persist until the imbalance becomes too great to ignore. Waking up alone, then, is not punishment. It is consequence. It is the psyche revealing the result of long-term disconnection. The morning feels sudden, but the cause is ancient. It has been forming quietly in missed conversations, deferred self-examination, and unspoken truths. Yet even here, there is meaning. The psyche does nothing without purpose. Loneliness often arrives not to destroy, but to awaken. It strips away distraction and forces confrontation with what has been avoided. In solitude, the noise fades, and the self becomes audible again. If one listens carefully, waking up alone can become the first honest conversation with oneself. It can reveal patterns that were invisible when others were present to absorb the consequences. It can expose the cost of comfort chosen over truth. The real division in life is not between those who wake up early and those who wake up late. It is between those who remain unconscious of their patterns and those who dare to see them. Awareness interrupts repetition. Reflection dissolves inevitability. When a person becomes conscious of how small avoidances shape large outcomes, they reclaim authorship of their life. The story no longer writes itself in silence. It becomes deliberate. Waking up late can be corrected tomorrow. Waking up alone asks for something deeper, that one finally wakes up inwardly. Most people do not choose loneliness in a deliberate way. They do not wake up one morning and decide to distance themselves from life, from love, from others. Loneliness, in its most common form, is not an act of rebellion, but a consequence of drifting. It emerges quietly when a person lives without awareness of their inner world. What is not examined does not disappear. It operates in the background, shaping behavior, tone, and presence without ever asking for permission. When inner life is ignored, reaction replaces response. The person no longer chooses how to act. They simply repeat what feels familiar. Defensiveness becomes automatic. Curiosity feels unnecessary. Instead of asking, "Why did this affect me?" the person protects themselves with silence, irritation, or withdrawal. These reactions feel justified in the moment, but over time they create a subtle emotional distance that neither side knows how to name. This distance is difficult to recognize because it does not announce itself. There is no dramatic rupture. Life continues to function. You may still come home to someone. You may still share meals, responsibilities, routines. But psychologically, you are elsewhere. One body is present, but the mind and emotional life are scattered, absorbed in worries, ambitions, unresolved conflicts, or constant stimulation. Presence becomes partial. Connection becomes thin. Unconscious living has a peculiar effect. It fragments attention. The person is always occupied, always engaged, yet rarely available. They may believe they are doing their best, fulfilling roles, providing stability. And in many ways they are. But the psyche does not measure relationships by effort alone. It measures them by attunement. Consider the common figure of the professional who is always too busy. This person works long hours, carries responsibility, and often believes sacrifice is proof of love. Material needs are met. Comfort is provided. From the outside, everything appears functional. Yet psychologically, something essential is missing. Conversations become rushed. Emotional signals are overlooked. Moments that require listening are postponed for later that never arrives. Over time, the relationship begins to feel like a contract rather than a meeting of souls. Needs are managed, not felt. Presence is logistical, not emotional. The partner may struggle to explain what is wrong because nothing obvious is missing. And yet, something vital is absent: the sense of being truly met. Attachment psychology confirms this experience. Studies consistently show that emotional attunement, the capacity to notice, respond to, and validate another person's inner state, is far more important than the quantity of time spent together. A few minutes of genuine presence can nourish a relationship more deeply than hours of distracted proximity. The psyche responds not to duration, but to depth. Unconscious living erodes this depth. When individuals are disconnected from their own emotions, they cannot fully perceive the emotions of others. They miss subtle cues. They misinterpret silence. They dismiss feelings that feel inconvenient or unfamiliar. What cannot be recognized internally cannot be sustained externally. This is how invisible walls are built. No one announces them. No one intends them. They rise gradually, brick by brick, through neglected conversations, unexpressed needs, and habitual distractions. Each wall is thin enough to ignore, yet strong enough to separate. And because they are invisible, people often feel the distance long before they understand it. The tragedy of unconscious distance is that it is often mistaken for normalcy. People adapt to it. They lower expectations. They tell themselves that this is how life works, that emotional closeness fades with time. But the psyche knows better. It signals distress through loneliness, restlessness, irritability, or a vague sense of emptiness that cannot be explained. Loneliness in this context is not the absence of others. It is the absence of connection. It is the experience of being unseen while being physically present. And it affects not only relationships, but the individual's sense of self. When a person lives without inner awareness, they also lose contact with their own depth. They become efficient, functional, and productive, but internally diminished. Yet unconsciousness is not fate. Awareness changes everything. The moment a person begins to observe their reactions, question their habits, and listen to their inner life, distance begins to dissolve, curiosity returns, presence deepens. What was automatic becomes intentional. Unconscious living builds walls slowly. Conscious living softens them just as quietly. Responsibility is experienced by the psyche as weight. It presses against comfort, challenges familiar identities, and demands effort where ease once lived. Because of this, many people instinctively avoid it. Avoidance feels light. It promises relief. It whispers that there will be time later, that consequences are distant, that someone else will compensate. For a while, this illusion works. Life continues. Relationships survive. The cost remains hidden, but what feels light in the beginning rarely remains so. Weight does not disappear when it is avoided. It shifts, and eventually, it returns with greater force. Avoiding responsibility for one's emotional reactions is often the first step. Instead of examining why anger arises, it is justified. Instead of questioning defensiveness, it is rationalized. The individual begins to believe that their inner storms are caused entirely by the world around them. In this way, responsibility is outsourced, blame becomes a refuge, growth is postponed, habits follow the same pattern. What is repeated without reflection becomes automatic. Promises are made with sincerity and broken without awareness. Change is spoken about more often than it is practiced. The person does not become malicious, they become inconsistent, and inconsistency slowly erodes trust. A fragile life is not one that faces hardship, it is one that depends on others to carry what the individual refuses to hold themselves. At first, people are willing. Love, friendship, and loyalty often involve patience. Others compensate. They adjust expectations, they make excuses, but carrying another person's unexamined weight has a cost. Fatigue accumulates. Resentment grows quietly. Eventually, even the most generous spirit grows tired. This dynamic is often visible in friendships that fade without drama. Two people begin at the same point, sharing values, dreams, and closeness. Over time, one begins to reflect. They question themselves. They adapt. They take responsibility for their limitations and work through discomfort. The other remains unchanged. Not because they are incapable, but because they are unwilling. The distance that forms is not fueled by anger or betrayal. It is created by misalignment. Growth changes perspective. What once felt tolerable becomes constricting. Conversations lose depth. Shared experiences lose meaning. One person moves forward, the other stays behind, and the space between them grows without accusation. From a psychological standpoint, growth requires the willingness to confront the unknown within oneself. It demands discomfort because it challenges the identity one has built to feel safe. The psyche resists this because the familiar, even when limiting, feels secure. Avoidance, therefore, is not laziness. It is fear disguised as comfort. But fear always demands payment. Avoiding responsibility postpones discomfort, but it multiplies consequence. The individual who avoids self-examination avoids temporary pain, but invites long-term isolation. Relationships cannot evolve when one party refuses to. Life cannot deepen when responsibility is continuously deferred. This is why avoidance often leads to loneliness that feels confusing and unfair. The person may believe they have done nothing wrong, and on the surface, that may be true, but inner development is not measured by harm avoided. It is measured by responsibility embraced. Responsibility does not mean self-blame. It means ownership of reactions, patterns, and choices. When a person accepts responsibility, they reclaim power. They move from being a victim of circumstance to an active participant in their own life. The irony is that responsibility, though heavy at first, ultimately lightens the psyche. What is carried consciously weighs less than what is dragged unconsciously. When individuals face their inner life honestly, they no longer depend on others to absorb the cost of their avoidance. Relationships become partnerships rather than support systems. There is a profound difference between being supported and being carried. Support strengthens. Being carried weakens both parties. Some people wake up late because they stayed up too long, indulging comfort without foresight. The consequence is mild and temporary. Others wake up alone because they refused the deeper work of maturity. They avoided the discomfort that builds character, integrity, and depth. Growing up is not about age. It is about responsibility. And responsibility, though heavy at the beginning, is the only weight that does not eventually crush the soul. Loneliness is commonly misunderstood as rejection, as evidence that something has gone wrong or that one has been left behind by life. Yet loneliness is not always abandonment. Very often, it is a message delivered by the psyche when all other signals have been ignored. It does not arrive to punish, but to instruct. It removes what distracts so that what truly matters can finally be heard. Most people fear solitude, not because it is painful in itself, but because it is revealing. In the absence of noise, unresolved fears begin to speak. Regrets surface. Unlived lives make themselves known. The roles we perform for others fall away, and what remains is the self as it truly is, unpolished, unfinished, and honest. This encounter is unsettling, which is why distraction has become one of the most powerful defenses of modern life. When constant stimulation disappears, silence takes its place, and silence is not empty. It is filled with memory, longing, and unanswered questions. Many people rush to fill this space because they have never learned how to sit with themselves. They confuse loneliness with emptiness, when in fact it is often fullness without direction. The psyche uses solitude as a mirror. In relationships and social roles, parts of the self can remain hidden or projected outward. Others reflect us back to ourselves, often in comforting ways. But when one is alone, projection collapses. There is no one left to carry what has been avoided. The inner life becomes unavoidable. This is why waking up alone can feel devastating. The external world has gone quiet, and the internal world has become loud. The loss is not only of companionship, but of distraction. One is left face to face with choices once postponed, feelings once suppressed, and truths once softened. The pain of loneliness often comes not from absence, but from recognition. Yet within this recognition lies an opportunity. Psychological studies on long-term solitude reveal a striking pattern. Individuals who use alone time for reflection rather than escape tend to emerge more grounded, emotionally stable, and self-aware. Those who resist distraction and turn inward begin to reorganize their inner life. What was once chaotic finds structure. What was unconscious becomes named. Loneliness, in this sense, functions like a threshold. It marks the transition between living outwardly and living inwardly. Before it, identity is often shaped by expectation, habit, and adaptation. After it, identity must be consciously formed. The question is not whether loneliness will be experienced, but how it will be met. Those who flee from it often repeat the same patterns, seeking relief in new faces, new environments, or constant activity. But the psyche is patient. The message returns, again and again, until it is understood. One cannot outrun what is internal. Those who remain, however, who stay with the discomfort long enough to listen, discover something unexpected. loneliness begins to change. It softens. It becomes less about lack and more about presence. The individual starts to hear their own voice again, not the voice shaped by demand or approval, but the one shaped by truth. In solitude, priorities rearrange themselves. What once seemed urgent reveals itself as trivial. What was neglected emerges as essential. This is why loneliness, when approached consciously, often leads to clarity. It forces the question that busy life avoids. What am I actually living for? This question can be frightening because it dissolves illusions. But it is also liberating. When a person listens rather than resists, loneliness becomes a teacher. It exposes false attachments, unexamined fears, and unlived potentials. It reveals where one has compromised themselves to belong, where they have silenced their own needs to avoid conflict, where they have postponed becoming who they are capable of being. Waking up alone, then, is not the end of connection. It is the beginning of a different kind of relationship, the relationship with oneself. Without this relationship, all others remain fragile, dependent, and incomplete. With it, future connections are chosen rather than needed. Loneliness asks only one question, but it asks it relentlessly. Will you finally listen to what you have been avoiding? When this question is met with honesty rather than fear, solitude transforms from a wound into a passage. Awakening is often misunderstood as something mystical, distant, or reserved for rare moments of revelation. But awakening is not a spiritual fantasy. It is far more grounded and far more demanding. It is psychological honesty, the willingness to see oneself without distortion, excuse, or avoidance. It begins not with transcendence, but with attention. To awaken means to notice patterns before they harden into fate. Every life is shaped by repetition. Repeated thoughts become beliefs. Repeated reactions become personality. Repeated choices become character. When these repetitions go unexamined, they quietly determine the course of relationships and the direction of a life. Awareness interrupts this automatic process. It creates a pause where choice becomes possible. Many people lose connection not because they intend to, but because they fail to notice the moment, when listening is replaced by waiting, when understanding is replaced by defense, when presence is replaced by routine. Silence does not usually arrive suddenly. It is formed through small moments when something could have been said, felt, or acknowledged, but was not. Awakening allows these moments to be recognized while they are still alive. Psychological honesty requires listening not only to others, but to oneself. It asks uncomfortable questions. Why do I react this way? What am I avoiding? What fear is shaping my behavior? These questions are rarely pleasant, which is why they are often postponed. Yet postponement allows unconscious forces to take control. What is not faced internally appears externally as consequence. Taking responsibility before consequences arrive uninvited is one of the clearest signs of awakening. Responsibility here does not mean harsh self-judgment. It means ownership. Ownership of one's emotional responses, habits, and impact on others. When responsibility is accepted early, it prevents the accumulation of resentment, misunderstanding, and distance. When it is delayed, life delivers lessons more forcefully. People who remain connected romantically, socially, and internally are rarely flawless. They misunderstand, disappoint, and struggle like everyone else. What distinguishes them is not perfection, but awareness. They reflect instead of deflect. They repair instead of retreat. When distance appears, they do not deny it. They move toward it with curiosity rather than fear. Awareness makes repair possible. Without it, mistakes repeat themselves under different circumstances. With it, even painful moments become material for growth. An aware person can say, "I see where I withdrew," or "I recognize how I avoided this conversation," or "I understand why this hurt you." These acknowledgments may seem small, but they have enormous psychological power. They restore trust because they restore reality. Waking up early or late matters little in the long run. These are surface behaviors easily corrected. But waking up to oneself changes everything. It shifts the center of gravity from external control to internal clarity. Life stops happening to the person and begins happening through them. When a person becomes conscious of their inner life, outer relationships reorganize naturally. There is less projection because unresolved parts are owned rather than assigned to others. There is less conflict because emotions are recognized before they erupt. There is more presence because attention is no longer scattered by unexamined fears and compulsions. This reorganization does not require dramatic change. It requires consistency. Awareness practice daily alters tone, timing, and intention. Listening deepens. Responses slow. Assumptions weaken. The person becomes someone others feel with rather than around. Awakening also brings a quiet courage. It allows one to face discomfort rather than flee it. Difficult conversations are no longer avoided until they become crises. Emotional signals are addressed before they harden into resentment. This does not eliminate pain, but it transforms pain into information rather than damage. People stop losing others not because they become more controlling, pleasing, or perfect. They stop losing others because they finally show up fully, honestly, and attentively. Presence, more than effort, is what sustains connection. Presence communicates value without words. It tells others, "You matter enough for me to be here." At its core, awakening is an act of return, a return to one's own inner life, one's own responsibility, one's own capacity for attention. When this return happens, abandonment loses its power. Not because people never leave, but because connection is no longer built on unconscious absence. Awareness does not guarantee permanence. It guarantees depth, and depth, even when loss occurs, leaves less regret. A life lived awake may still experience separation, but it does not wake up wondering where it went wrong. Some people wake up late and laugh it off. Others wake up alone and wonder where everyone went. The difference is rarely luck. It is awareness. If you are still surrounded by people, pay attention. If you are alone, listen closely. Because life is always sending signals, and the cost of ignoring them is never paid immediately, but always paid in full.